The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty checkpoint as Captain Marcus Rivera squinted through his binoculars at the approaching group of refugees. It was the same heartbreaking scene he had witnessed dozens of times before. Families carrying their entire lives in plastic bags and worn suitcases. Children clinging to their parents' hands. Elderly people struggling to keep pace with the younger ones. The Civil War had been raging for 18 months now, and the stream of displaced people seemed endless. Among the group of 37 refugees, one woman caught his attention. She walked alone, her dark hair covered by a faded blue headscarf, her clothes torn and dusty like the others. But something about her posture, the way she carried herself, seemed different. While the other refugees looked around nervously, constantly checking over their shoulders, she kept her eyes focused straight ahead. Her movements were controlled, deliberate, almost military in their precision. "Sir, the refugee processing team is ready," Sergeant Thompson called out from behind him. Rivera lowered his binoculars and nodded. "Bring them through the standard screening, but keep extra eyes on that woman walking alone. Third row back, blue headscarf." "Anything specific, sir?" "Just a feeling. Run her through additional questioning if needed." The refugee camp at the border crossing of Zara Valley had become a temporary home for thousands of displaced civilians. The international aid workers had done their best to create some semblance of order, but the facility was overcrowded and understaffed. Captain Rivera's unit was responsible for security screening and ensuring that enemy combatants weren't infiltrating the refugee populations, a job that had become increasingly difficult as the war dragged on. As the group approached the processing tents, Rivera watched the woman more carefully. She appeared to be in her late 20s, with olive skin weathered by sun and hardship. Her backpack looked old but well-maintained, and despite her worn appearance, she seemed to be in better physical condition than most of the other refugees. When a small child stumbled and fell near her, she helped the boy up with quick, efficient movements before continuing forward without seeking recognition or thanks. The screening process began with the usual questions: names, places of origin, family members, reasons for leaving their homes. The stories were always similar: bombs falling on their neighborhoods, soldiers forcing them from their houses, loved ones killed or missing. Each tale was a reminder of the human cost of the conflict that had torn their country apart. When it was the woman's turn, she approached the processing table calmly. Her identity documents, like those of many refugees, were partially damaged but appeared authentic enough. "Name?" asked Corporal Martinez, the Spanish-speaking member of their team who had been handling most of the refugee interviews. "Elena Vasquez," she replied in accented English, her voice steady but appropriately subdued. "Place of birth?" "San Miguel, in the northern province." Her responses came naturally, without the hesitation that might indicate deception. She explained that her village had been attacked 3 weeks ago, that she had lost her husband in the fighting, and that she was hoping to reach her sister who lived in the capital city on the other side of the border. But there were small details that bothered Rivera. The calluses on her hands didn't match those of a farmer's wife or a shopkeeper. There was a small scar above her left eyebrow that looked like it might have come from tactical training rather than domestic accident. Most telling of all, when a helicopter flew overhead during her interview, she didn't flinch or look up like the other refugees did. Instead, she seemed to instinctively note its position and flight pattern. After Elena completed her screening, she was assigned to Section C of the refugee camp, a collection of white canvas tents that housed single women and elderly individuals. Rivera made a mental note of her tent number and decided to keep her under informal observation. That evening, as Rivera made his rounds through the camp, he noticed Elena sitting outside her tent, appearing to mend a piece of clothing. In reality, he realized she was carefully observing the camp's layout, noting the positions of guard posts, the timing of patrols, and the locations of key facilities. She was doing it subtly, professionally, in a way that wouldn't attract attention from anyone who wasn't specifically looking for such behavior. The next morning brought troubling news. Intelligence reports indicated that enemy forces were planning an attack on a humanitarian convoy that was scheduled to travel through the region in 3 days. The convoy would be carrying medical supplies and food aid to several isolated villages that had been cut off from assistance for months. It was exactly the kind of high-value, symbolically important target that the rebel forces liked to hit. Rivera's unit was tasked with providing security for the convoy. It would be a dangerous mission. The route passed through several areas where ambushes were common, and the rebel forces had become increasingly aggressive in targeting aid convoys. The journey would take them through mountain passes and narrow valleys where a small group of attackers could inflict serious damage on a larger force. As Rivera studied the mission briefings and route maps, he couldn't shake his suspicions about Elena. That afternoon, he decided to conduct an informal interview with her, approaching it as a routine welfare check on the refugees. "Vasquez," he called out as he approached her tent. "How are you settling in? Do you have everything you need?" She looked up from where she was sitting, her expression appropriately grateful but wary. "Yes, thank you, Captain. The aid workers have been very kind. I wanted to ask you a few more questions about your journey here. Sometimes refugees remember additional details after they've had time to rest." Elena nodded and gestured for him to sit on a small wooden crate that served as a makeshift chair. As they talked, Rivera asked about the route she had taken to reach the camp, the other travelers she had encountered, and the military activity she might have witnessed. Her answers were detailed and consistent, but Rivera noticed that she seemed to know more about troop movements and tactical situations than a typical civilian would. When he mentioned specific military units, she showed recognition that went beyond what someone would learn from casual observation or refugee camp gossip. "You seem to know quite a bit about military operations," Rivera observed carefully. Elena's expression didn't change, but he caught a flash of something in her eyes, calculation perhaps, or recognition that she had revealed more than intended. "When soldiers are in your village for weeks, when you're hiding in basements listening to gunfire every night, you learn to pay attention to these things," she replied. "It's how you stay alive." It was a reasonable explanation, but Rivera remained unconvinced. That night, he arranged for discreet surveillance of Elena's tent. If she was indeed an enemy operative, she might attempt to communicate with outside contacts or conduct reconnaissance activities under cover of darkness. The surveillance proved interesting, but inconclusive. Elena left her tent twice during the night, once to use the communal bathroom facilities and once to get water from the distribution point. Both trips appeared routine, but Rivera's observers noted that she took slightly different routes each time and seemed to be mentally mapping the camp's nighttime activity patterns. Meanwhile, preparations for the convoy mission continued. The route would take them through the Aguila Pass, a narrow mountain road that was the only practical way to reach the isolated villages. Intelligence suggested that if an attack was going to occur, it would most likely happen at one of 3 choke points along the route, where the road was too narrow for vehicles to turn around quickly. Rivera requested additional air support, but was told that helicopter assets were limited and couldn't provide continuous coverage for the entire journey. The convoy would have to rely primarily on its own security team and the element of surprise regarding its exact timing and route. As he studied the tactical challenges of the mission, Rivera found himself thinking about Elena. If she was indeed an enemy operative, what was her purpose at the refugee camp? Was she gathering intelligence for a future attack? Was she planning to somehow interfere with the base's operations? Or was she simply trying to blend in while moving to another location? The night before the convoy was scheduled to depart, Rivera made a decision that would prove to be crucial. Instead of simply leaving Elena under surveillance at the camp, he decided to bring her along on the mission. The decision seemed counterintuitive, taking a potential enemy operative on a dangerous humanitarian mission, but Rivera's reasoning was strategic. If Elena was hostile, it would be better to have her where he could watch her directly rather than leaving her free to potentially communicate the convoy's departure time and route to enemy forces. If she was simply an innocent refugee, the journey would get her closer to a stated destination in the capital city. He approached her that evening with the proposal, framing it as an opportunity to travel with the convoy partway to her destination. "Ms. Vasquez, we have a humanitarian convoy departing tomorrow that will be traveling toward the capital. If you'd like, we can arrange for you to travel with us. It would be safer than trying to make the journey on your own." Elena considered the offer carefully before accepting. "That would be very helpful, Captain. Thank you for thinking of me." As Rivera walked away, he wondered if he had just made a brilliant tactical decision or a potentially fatal mistake. Elena's response had been appropriately grateful, but he had caught something else in her expression, a look that suggested she found his offer interesting for reasons beyond simple transportation. That night, Elena packed her few belongings and prepared for the journey ahead. To any observer, she appeared to be a grateful refugee taking advantage of a generous offer from the military forces protecting her. But as she checked the contents of her backpack one final time, her fingers lingered on items that no ordinary refugee would carry. Hidden beneath layers of worn clothing and personal effects, carefully wrapped in waterproof material, were the disassembled components of a high-precision rifle. The parts were compact and well-maintained, showing the care of someone who understood that their life might depend on their weapon's reliability. Elena had been waiting for 3 weeks for exactly this opportunity. The intelligence she had been gathering wasn't for an attack on the refugee camp, or even for general military purposes. She had a very specific mission, and tomorrow's convoy journey would finally give her the chance to complete it. As dawn approached, both Rivera and Elena prepared for a journey that would test everything they believed about trust, deception, and the unexpected ways that enemies and allies could emerge in the chaos of war. Neither of them knew that within 24 hours, the line between hunter and protector would blur in ways that would challenge everything they thought they understood about their situation. The convoy was scheduled to depart at 0800 hours, and by 070 the vehicles were loaded and the security teams were conducting final equipment checks. Rivera had arranged for Elena to travel in the third vehicle, a position that would keep her in the middle of the convoy where she could be easily observed by his security personnel. But as the engine started and the convoy began to move out of the camp, Rivera had no idea that the woman he was watching so carefully was about to become the most important person in the entire mission. Elena Vasquez was not her real name, San Miguel was not her home, and her husband had not died in a village attack. In truth, she was Captain Ana Restrepo of the National Defense Forces, and she had been living undercover for 3 weeks, waiting for exactly this moment. Her mission was not to gather intelligence or to harm the convoy. Instead, she was there to protect it from a threat that intelligence reports had only hinted at, a threat that she had been tracking for months and that was now moving into position to attack the humanitarian mission. As the convoy wound its way through the valley roads toward the mountain passes, Elena sat quietly among the other passengers, her worn backpack resting at her feet. Inside the pack, carefully hidden and professionally maintained, were the tools she would need to save everyone in the convoy, including the suspicious captain who had been watching her so carefully. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, and the convoy moved closer to its destiny in the mountains ahead. The convoy wound its way through the valley roads as the morning sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows between the rocky outcroppings that lined the route. Captain Rivera sat in the lead vehicle, constantly scanning the terrain ahead through his binoculars while maintaining radio contact with the other security teams. The intelligence reports about a potential attack weighed heavily on his mind, and every bend in the road seemed to present a new tactical challenge. In the third vehicle, Elena sat quietly among a mix of aid workers and other passengers. To the casual observer, she appeared to be resting, perhaps even dozing, as the vehicle bounced along the rough mountain road. But behind her closed eyes, she was methodically reviewing everything she knew about the threat that was waiting ahead. For months, Captain Ana Restrepo had been tracking a sniper known only as El Fantasma, the Ghost. This individual had been responsible for at least 15 high-value assassinations, including the deaths of 3 aid workers, 2 government officials, and numerous military personnel. Intelligence suggested that the Ghost operated with a small support team and specialized in attacks on moving convoys in mountainous terrain. What made the Ghost particularly dangerous was not just exceptional marksmanship, but also an intimate knowledge of military tactics and security procedures. Several successful attacks had shown evidence of inside information about convoy routes, timing, and security arrangements. Anna had been assigned to a special task force dedicated to hunting down this threat, but the Ghost had proven frustratingly elusive. The breakthrough had come 3 weeks ago when intercepted communications suggested that the Ghost was planning an attack on a humanitarian convoy in the Aguila Pass region. Anna had volunteered to go undercover as a refugee, positioning herself at the camp to wait for the right opportunity. When Captain Rivera announced the convoy mission, she knew this was the moment she had been waiting for. The convoy consisted of 6 vehicles, 2 military escort vehicles at the front and rear, and 4 transport vehicles carrying medical supplies, food aid, and passengers. The route through Aguila Pass was unavoidable. It was the only road that could accommodate the larger supply trucks, and alternative routes would add days to the journey while taking them through even more dangerous territory. As they began the ascent into the mountain pass, Rivera's radio crackled with updates from his forward scouts. So far, the route appeared clear, but experience had taught him that in this type of terrain, threats could materialize with little warning. The narrow road, with steep rock walls on one side and a precipitous drop on the other, provided limited options for evasive maneuvers if they came under attack. Elena opened her eyes and looked out the window at the terrain they were passing through. She recognized several landmarks from the detailed topographical maps she had memorized during her mission planning. According to her intelligence, the Ghost's most likely attack position would be at one of 3 locations: 2 hairpin turns where the road was particularly narrow, and a straight section where there was a clear field of fire from elevated positions on the opposite side of the valley. The first potential ambush site passed without incident. Rivera's security teams had sent advanced scouts ahead, and they reported no signs of hostile activity. But Elena knew that the Ghost was too professional to choose such an obvious location. The real danger lay ahead, at a section of road that offered the perfect combination of concealment, fields of fire, and escape routes. As the convoy approached the second potential ambush site, Elena quietly reached into her backpack and began to feel for the familiar components of her disassembled rifle. Moving slowly to avoid drawing attention, she located the stock, barrel, and scope, all wrapped in cloth to prevent them from making noise as the vehicle bounced along the road. Captain Rivera was focused on coordinating with his advance team when Elena made her move. Using the natural movements caused by the vehicle's motion to mask her actions, she carefully assembled her rifle piece by piece. The weapon was a custom-modified precision rifle, built for accuracy at extreme ranges and designed to be quickly assembled in field conditions. The other passengers in the vehicle were focused on their own concerns: aid workers reviewing their distribution plans, refugees worrying about their destinations, military personnel watching the road ahead. None of them noticed the woman in the torn headscarf, methodically putting together a weapon that could change the course of their journey. Elena's radio, a specialized communications device disguised as an old-fashioned transistor radio, began to pick up low-frequency transmissions. The signals were encrypted, but her equipment could decode them automatically. What she heard confirmed her worst fears. The Ghost and his team were in position and preparing to initiate their attack. The convoy was approaching the kill zone. Elena completed the assembly of her rifle and quietly chambered a round. Through her window, she could see the terrain where the attack would come from. A series of rocky outcroppings about 800 meters away on the opposite side of the valley. From that position, the Ghost would have clear shots at the convoy as it passed through a straight section of road where evasive action would be nearly impossible. Rivera's voice came over the radio. All units were approaching the danger zone. Maintain alertness and prepare for possible contact. Elena knew she had only minutes to act. The Ghost would wait until the convoy was fully committed to the straight section of road before opening fire, probably targeting the lead vehicle first to stop the convoy, then methodically engaging the other vehicles. Standard military doctrine for this type of ambush called for the security teams to dismount and attempt to locate and suppress the sniper position. But given the terrain and the distances involved, such a response would likely be too slow to prevent significant casualties. She had a different plan. Elena quietly moved to a position where she could open the vehicle's rear window without being noticed by the other passengers. The window opened outward, providing her with a stable shooting platform if she could brace herself properly. She had practiced this type of shot from moving vehicles dozens of times during her special operations training, but never under these exact conditions. Through her rifle scope, Elena began scanning the suspected sniper positions. The Ghost's reputation for concealment was well-deserved. Even with her high-powered optics and knowledge of the most likely positions, it took her several minutes to locate the threat. There, a slight irregularity in the shadows near a cluster of boulders, about 750 meters away and 200 meters above the road. It was barely visible, just the outline of a rifle barrel and the edge of a camouflaged position, but Elena had spent enough time hunting snipers to recognize the signs. The convoy was now entering the kill zone. Elena could see the Ghost's rifle beginning to track the lead vehicle. In seconds, the attack would begin. Elena took a deep breath, steadied her aim, and prepared to take a shot that would reveal her true identity to everyone in the convoy. But there was no choice. If the Ghost succeeded in stopping the convoy in this narrow pass, the resulting casualties could be catastrophic. Just as Elena was preparing to fire, something unexpected happened. The Ghost's position suddenly erupted in gunfire, but the shots were not directed at the convoy. Instead, they were aimed at positions further up the mountainside. Elena realized that the Ghost was not alone. There was another threat that she had not anticipated. Through her scope, she could see muzzle flashes from at least 3 different positions high above the road. A second ambush team had been positioned to attack the convoy from the uphill side, using the distraction of the Ghost's sniper fire to move into position for a devastating crossfire attack. The situation had become far more complex and dangerous than Elena had anticipated. The convoy was caught between 2 hostile forces, and her original plan to neutralize a single sniper was no longer sufficient to save the mission. Rivera's voice crackled over the radio. Contact. We're taking fire from multiple positions. All vehicles execute emergency procedures. But the narrow road offered no real options for emergency procedures. The convoy was trapped in a kill zone between 2 hostile forces, and within moments the situation could become a massacre. Elena made a split-second decision that would change everything. Instead of trying to hide her identity any longer, she threw open the vehicle's rear window and began engaging targets with rapid, precise fire. Her first shot took out the Ghost before he could fire at the convoy. The range was challenging, but Elena had trained for exactly these conditions. Her bullet struck the sniper position with devastating accuracy, eliminating the primary threat in a single shot. Immediately, she shifted her aim to the secondary positions higher up the mountainside. These targets were more difficult, greater range, more concealment, and they were now aware that someone in the convoy was shooting back. But Elena had advantages that the attackers didn't expect: superior training, better equipment, and intimate knowledge of sniper tactics and concealment techniques. The passengers in her vehicle were in shock, the aid workers were diving for cover, other refugees were screaming, and the military personnel were trying to figure out where the precise return fire was coming from. It took them several seconds to realize that the woman they had assumed was a helpless refugee was methodically engaging enemy positions with professional-grade marksmanship. Elena's second shot disabled one of the attackers on the uphill positions, sending the others scrambling for better cover. But she knew that her temporary advantage wouldn't last long. The remaining attackers would quickly adjust their tactics now that they knew the convoy had a skilled marksman providing counterfire. Rivera's voice came over the radio again. "Who's doing the shooting? I need to know who's engaging those positions." Elena couldn't answer without revealing her cover completely, but her actions were speaking louder than any radio transmission could. Shot after shot rang out from the third vehicle, each one precisely placed to either eliminate threats or force the attackers to abandon advantageous positions. The convoy's original security plan had called for the escort vehicles to deploy troops who would attempt to locate and suppress sniper positions using standard infantry tactics. But Elena's intervention had changed the entire dynamic of the engagement. Instead of being trapped in a kill zone, the convoy now had effective counter-sniper fire that was disrupting the attackers' plans and buying time for other defensive measures. Captain Rivera realized what was happening and immediately adapted his tactics. Instead of deploying troops in a time-consuming dismounted assault, he ordered the convoy to maintain speed and push through the ambush zone while Elena provided covering fire. Elena's rifle cracked again, and another enemy position fell silent. She was now engaging targets at ranges exceeding 900 meters from a moving platform while maintaining accuracy that would have been impressive from a stationary position. The remaining attackers found themselves in an impossible situation. They had planned for a convoy with standard military escorts, not one that included a sniper of Elena's caliber. As the convoy raced through the remaining section of the kill zone, Elena continued to provide covering fire, systematically eliminating or suppressing every enemy position that posed a threat to the vehicles. Her shooting was so accurate and so rapid that the attackers began to retreat, unwilling to face a marksman who could engage them effectively at ranges where they had expected to have all the advantages. Within 10 minutes, the convoy had cleared the ambush zone entirely. The attack that had been planned to destroy a humanitarian mission and kill dozens of people had been completely thwarted by one woman with a rifle and the tactical knowledge to use it effectively. But Elena's actions had come at a cost to her cover. As the convoy pulled to a stop in a secure area several kilometers past the ambush site, Captain Rivera and his security team surrounded the third vehicle with weapons drawn. They had questions that demanded immediate answers, and Elena knew that her time as a refugee was over. As she carefully safed her rifle and prepared to explain herself, Elena could see the mix of anger, confusion, and grudging respect in the faces of the soldiers surrounding her. She had saved their lives, but she had also deceived them completely. The next few minutes would determine whether she would be treated as a hero or a threat. Captain Rivera approached the third vehicle with his weapon drawn but lowered, his expression a mixture of anger and bewilderment. Behind him, his security team maintained defensive positions while the aid workers and refugees cowered inside the vehicles, still processing what they had witnessed. The woman they had known as Elena Vasquez sat calmly in the back of the transport truck, her rifle now resting across her lap, waiting for the confrontation she knew was inevitable. "Step out of the vehicle slowly, hands visible," Rivera commanded. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to dangerous situations, but there was also an undercurrent of uncertainty. The woman had just saved their lives, but she had also been deceiving them from the moment she arrived at the refugee camp. Elena complied with the order, moving deliberately and keeping her hands in plain sight as she exited the vehicle. She left her rifle behind, understanding that any sudden movements might trigger a response from the nervous soldiers surrounding her. As she stepped onto the mountain road, the other passengers stared at her in shock. The transformation from helpless refugee to lethal marksman had been so complete and so sudden that some of them were still struggling to accept what they had witnessed. "Your real name, rank, and unit," Rivera demanded, his weapon still ready but not directly threatening. Elena straightened her posture, and for the first time since arriving at the refugee camp, she allowed her military bearing to show completely. Captain Anna Restrepo, National Defense Forces, Special Operations Division. The revelation sent a ripple of surprise through the security team. A captain, an officer of equal rank to Rivera himself, operating undercover in their refugee camp for weeks. The implications were staggering, and Rivera found himself reassessing every interaction he had had with this woman who had been hiding in plain sight. Special Operations, Rivera repeated, processing the information. What's your mission here? Intelligence indicated he was planning to target this specific mission. Rivera holstered his weapon but remained alert. Why wasn't I informed about this operation? My unit is responsible for security in this sector. The operation was classified above your clearance level, Anna explained. There was intelligence suggesting that the Ghost had inside information about convoy operations. The decision was made to compartmentalize the counter-operation to prevent any possible intelligence leaks. The accusation that there might be security breaches within Rivera's command didn't sit well with him, but he recognized the tactical logic behind the decision. In counterintelligence operations, sometimes the most dangerous enemy was the one you couldn't identify among your own forces. Sergeant Thompson approached cautiously. Sir, we've confirmed that the ambush positions are clear. We count at least 4 enemy casualties, and the remaining attackers appear to have withdrawn completely. Anna nodded towards the mountainside where the attack had originated. The primary target, El Fantasma, was neutralized with my first shot. The secondary team was not anticipated. They were likely recruited locally to provide additional firepower. Without their leader and facing effective counterfire, they had no choice but to retreat. Rivera studied Anna's face, looking for any signs of deception or hidden motives. What he saw was a professional soldier who had successfully completed an extremely dangerous mission under conditions that would have challenged even the most experienced operators, but questions remained. How long have you been tracking this target, he asked. 8 months, Anna replied. The Ghost was responsible for the death of my previous commanding officer during a convoy attack similar to today's ambush. This mission was as much about justice as it was about preventing future casualties. The personal element added another dimension to the operation. Rivera understood the drive for justice, but it also raised concerns about whether Anna's judgment had been compromised by her desire for revenge. Show me your identification and orders, Rivera requested. Anna reached slowly into a backpack, producing a sealed packet of documents. Rivera examined them carefully: military identification, special operations credentials, and mission orders signed by senior officers in the defense forces. Everything appeared authentic and properly authorized, though the classification levels were indeed higher than his own security clearance. As Rivera reviewed the documents, Anna continued her explanation. The refugee camp provided the perfect cover for surveillance and intelligence gathering. The Ghost was known to conduct reconnaissance on potential targets before attacking, and there was a high probability that he or his associates would observe the camp before the convoy departed. And you were willing to risk the lives of actual refugees by using them as cover? Rivera's question carried a note of moral challenge. The refugees were never at risk from my presence, Anna replied firmly. If anything, they were safer because I was there. The original attack plan would have targeted the refugee camp as well. The Ghost's previous operations have shown a pattern of eliminating potential witnesses. Rivera had to acknowledge the logic of her argument, even if he didn't like the deception involved. The mission had been successful, the convoy had been saved, and a dangerous threat had been eliminated. But the implications of having an unknown operative working in his sector continued to trouble him. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the lead aid worker in the convoy, approached the group cautiously. She had been coordinating relief efforts in the region for 2 years and had seen the devastating effects of attacks on humanitarian missions. Captain Restrepo, she said, I want to thank you for what you did today. Without your intervention, we would all be dead, and thousands of people in the villages ahead would continue to suffer without the medical supplies we're carrying. Anna nodded respectfully. It was my duty, Doctor. The mission is to protect people like you who are doing essential work in dangerous conditions. Rivera found himself caught between admiration for Anna's skill and effectiveness and frustration at being kept in the dark about the operation. As a field commander, he was accustomed to having complete information about security threats and friendly forces in his area of responsibility. The discovery that a special operations officer had been working undercover in his sector for weeks was a significant breach of protocol, even if it had ultimately saved lives. What happens now? He asked. Is your mission complete? The primary objective has been achieved, Anna confirmed. But there are still members of the Ghost's network who need to be identified and neutralized. The intelligence we gathered from today's attack will be crucial for follow-up operations. Rivera realized that Anna's mission was far from over, and that the convoy attack had likely provided valuable information about the enemy's tactics, equipment, and support structure. The bodies and equipment left behind at the ambush site would be analyzed for intelligence value, and any captured communications or documents could lead to additional operations against the terrorist network. The convoy needed to continue its journey to deliver the humanitarian supplies to the isolated villages ahead. But Rivera also had to report the events of the day to his superiors, including the discovery of the unauthorized special operations mission in his sector. "Can you provide me with a contact for your commanding officer?" Rivera asked. "I'll need to coordinate with your chain of command to ensure there are no conflicts with ongoing security operations." Anna provided the contact information, understanding that Rivera needed to follow proper military protocols even in unusual circumstances. She also recognized that his concerns about operational security and command authority were legitimate, even if they had been overruled by higher-level security considerations. As the convoy prepared to continue its journey, Anna faced a decision about her immediate future. Her cover as a refugee had been completely blown, and she could no longer operate covertly in the region. But her mission wasn't entirely complete. There were still intelligence leads to follow and additional threats to neutralize. "Captain Rivera," she said, "I'd like to request permission to accompany the convoy for the remainder of its journey. My mission requires me to gather additional intelligence about the enemy network, and the villages you're visiting may have information that could be valuable for follow-up operations." Anna had proven her value as a protector of the convoy, and her skills could be useful if they encountered additional threats on the road ahead. But traveling with a special operations officer would also complicate his command structure and reporting requirements. "Agreed," he decided, "but you'll be operating under my command for the duration of the convoy mission. No independent operations without my approval." "Understood, sir," Anna replied with a slight smile. It was the first time Rivera had seen her smile, and it transformed her face completely, showing a warmth and humanity that had been completely hidden during her time as a refugee. As the convoy resumed its journey toward the villages that desperately needed their supplies, the passengers gradually began to process what they had witnessed. The aid workers found themselves looking at Anna with a mixture of gratitude and amazement, while the actual refugees seemed to take comfort in knowing that such a skilled protector was traveling with them. Dr. God testified. Martinez sat down next to Anna as the vehicles wound their way through the mountain passes. "How do you do it?" she asked quietly. "How do you carry that kind of responsibility, knowing that people's lives depend on your actions?" Anna considered the question carefully. "The same way you do, Doctor. You save lives with medicine and humanitarian aid. I save lives with different tools and different methods. We're both trying to protect people who can't protect themselves." It was a perspective that Dr. Martinez had never considered, but she found herself nodding in understanding. In a war-torn region where violence and compassion existed side by side, perhaps it took all kinds of heroes to make a difference. Captain Rivera, monitoring the radio traffic from the lead vehicle, found himself reassessing his initial assumptions about Anna's mission. Yes, he had been kept in the dark about the operation, and yes, it had complicated his command responsibilities. But the results spoke for themselves. A major terrorist threat had been eliminated, dozens of lives had been saved, and a crucial humanitarian mission had been completed successfully. As the convoy descended from the mountain passes toward the villages that awaited their supplies, Rivera realized that the day's events had taught him something important about the nature of modern warfare. In a conflict where enemies and allies could be difficult to distinguish, where threats could emerge from unexpected directions, the most important allies were sometimes the ones you never knew you had. Anna Restrepo had spent 3 weeks living as a refugee, sharing the hardships and fears of genuinely displaced people, all while preparing for a mission that could save countless lives. Her deception had been necessary, her skills had been crucial, and her dedication had been absolute. The convoy reached the first village as the sun began to set, painting the mountain peaks in shades of gold and red. As the aid workers began unloading their supplies, and the villagers gathered to welcome their long-awaited assistance, Anna quietly gathered her equipment and prepared for the next phase of her mission. The woman who had posed as a refugee had revealed herself to be something far more dangerous and far more valuable. A guardian angel with a sniper's rifle, watching over those who could not watch over themselves in a world where the line between protector and deceiver was sometimes impossibly thin. Captain Rivera watched Anna as she helped unload medical supplies, her military precision now obvious in every movement. Tomorrow she would disappear again, probably into another identity, another mission, another deception designed to protect people who would never know her real name. But today she had saved them all, and that was enough. Posing as a refugee, she turned out to be the sniper who saved the convoy.